Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a ton to discuss. First of all, thank you so much to all the new listeners. We actually have had a ton of subscribers since the last episode. I know a lot of you really enjoyed the information regarding Alabama basketball practice. We will have some more content on this show a little bit about basketball because I do have a guest, as I alluded to earlier this week and in some of the past episodes. I want to give a little bit of an intro before we get started, and then I'll get right into the interview. As always, if you are not subscribed to the show, if you could do so, it absolutely does help me out. I've also been told to, rate any ratings or reviews on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. They all do help me out. Any subscription, Spotify, Apple, everything helps me out if it is possible. I really would appreciate it. The other thing, if you hear any ads over on over on Apple and Spotify, it's because I'm partnered with the Believe Podcast Network. So anything that you may help out those sponsors, that helps me out as well. Like I said, if you do enjoy the show, that is something that you can do as the listener. It's completely free to you, and it really does help me out as the creator. So, the interview today is with Joe Gaither. He is a writer with Bama Central, with the SI Network. He is a guy who actually, I believe we crossed paths a couple times during college. He graduated in 2018 while I was there in 2019. We both were in communication college in Reese Pfeiffer, so I believe we kind of crossed paths a couple of times. But he is a guy that, has the Joe Gaither show, and I just wanted to bring him on, like I said, as a part of the different people that I'm bringing on this summer. I have 3 or 4 more people still willing to come onto the show. So he's another one in that list. We talk a little bit about basketball. We talk about football, everything from recruiting to the quarterback battle to the schedule and Ryan Williams and Diego Pavia. And for basketball, we even talk about, who he's interested in and plenty of different things in this interview. So if you are interested in either of the sports or, what some other people may have to say, please listen into this interview. I thought it was a really, really fun time to talk, and I will cut to the interview now. And we are joined today by none other than Joe Gaither. You can find him on Twitter at Joe Gaither6. He's a writer for Bama Central with Sports Illustrated. He has the Joe Gaither Show, which is a podcast that you can find either through Bama Central or on YouTube. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Wanted to bring you on. Obviously, this channel, for anybody that's followed me for a little while, knows that, it's mostly focused on basketball and football. Obviously, I do cover some of the other sports. We may hint at a couple other things that are going on around campus, but, super heavily focused on football and basketball. I'm going to start here at the top with some basketball news that's actually happened since I most recently recorded. Alabama, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, drew Clemson for the SEC ACC Challenge. I wanted to see what your kind of thoughts on that were. I know a lot of fans thought that we were going to get the return trip from Carolina, maybe pull, worst case scenario, pull like an NC State for Will Wade or pull a Louisville. I don't think Clemson was the team people were expecting. What are your kind of general thoughts on that one?
I was definitely with you on the disappointment. I wanted to see Big Brand, North Carolina, or Duke, but you see, where Alabama is stacked in the pecking order of the SEC. Obviously, you go to the back-to-back Elite Eight, it's a Final Four and an Elite Eight. You're doing really, really well. But with Florida winning the national championship and all the work that Kentucky did in the transfer portal, they get the 2 biggest brands in the ACC. Next, I would have rather had Miami with the Jalil Bethea connection there. I think that would have been a lot of fun for really him and for the fans to kind of latch onto. Last year's Clemson matchup, it was one of the worst times I've had in Coleman Coliseum. Not only for the play on the court and the result, but really it was one of the, no disrespect, worst attended games of the year. And so I'm hopeful that it is a better attended game, and I'm sure that ESPN has the last year's Elite Eight matchup that in mind when they scheduled that. I was definitely disappointed, but I think that if you spin it into a chance for the fans to get a redo, what was that? That was the Jay Williams tennis match game, right? That the fans can get a redo on that and maybe get a quality win under their belt.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I was at that game. The attendance was not good. It was actually on my girlfriend's birthday.
Happy birthday.
And she like had told me like, "Oh no, like I've got stuff going on." So I ended up going to usually she comes with me to all the games, and she had something else going on. So I ended up going to it by myself. And you're right, the attendance was not good. There maybe was 9,500 people. Like, I mean, it was, 2/3 full. Maybe it was, yeah, you're right. It was the Jay Williams tennis match game. It was Ian Shefflin bullying Jaron Stevenson from the jump. I mean, it was just a brutal game. Obviously, I'm very glad that Shefflin is now out of basketball eligibility because he will not be coming back into Coleman. Obviously, we got our payback making the Final Four, but that's one that definitely I was a little confused by that. I was a little also confused that Duke got the double home game. They got the home game last year at Cameron Indoor against Auburn, or this past year, and then they get Auburn in Cameron Indoor again. I was a little confused by that one. Most recently it's felt like we've switched back and forth. So I'm not exactly sure how ESPN, the SEC, ACC really went about scheduling that one. There's definitely some things that I've been a little unsure about. The last one that I want to ask you about, and I'm not sure if you've been able to attend any of the practices. I know some of them were semi-open, semi-not, but I'm sure you, like me and plenty of others, have heard some of the news out of practice. Have you heard like one or two guys that are the surprises out of practice? And maybe people need to look out for coming into next season.
Well, I'm not sure if he qualifies as a surprise as a former five star prospect and then the transfer. But I think that people are really sleeping on what Jaleel Bethea will be doing and what kind of role he'll be playing and how impactful he's going to be. I'm really excited to see what he will do. We made such a big deal last year about Aiden Holloway transferring after a kind of a lackluster freshman season, up and down freshman season at Auburn. Miami, they had their coach leave in the middle of the year, fed up with NIL, and basically their whole season went into the tank. I think that it was kind of let's more or less a selfish season for all the Miami players once the coach left. I think it all imploded, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he will do in a system, in the Nate Oates system, and in a program that will hold him a little bit accountable, but really demand a lot from him.
Yeah, and that's kind of my thoughts around Bethea. That's the Aiden Holloway connection is the connection that I think most people have made, and for good reason, right? When you look at the type of system that Aiden Holloway, what he looked like in Nate Oates' system compared to what he looked like in a set shot system with Bruce Pearl, just was a different skill set. The fact that you see Jaleel Bethea, statistically, this is one that, shocks people, is the worst shooting guard that we have coming onto this team. And if you think about the reason he had the 5-star rating, like he was a better shooter than Con Knipple. He was a better shooter than plenty of guys that are about to get drafted here coming up very, very soon. And it was because of what he did, obviously in the AAU circuit. And so I agree. I think he's a guy. The other guy, and I mentioned it, and I just want to say it again because I've seen, even since I've posted my last video, more and more people, Keaton Bristow is a name that if you do not know it, you need to go ahead and find out about it. Because he was a name that nobody really thought about moving from Tarleton State. Like, who is this kid? Yeah, he won Freshman of the Year in the WAC, but who is he? He is a name that if you have not heard it, listen here now. Go ahead and look him up. His defense is like every time I ask people that have either been to practice or read message boards or anything of people that have been there, he's the name that keeps coming back up. Obviously Bethea, right? But as you said, I think he's under the radar for people that haven't paid attention because you just see the poor shooting numbers and you're like, this guy's not that good, right? You have to give somebody also some slack, like you said, when their coach leaves.
Well, that and you go, take it back to the last question with Clemson. All these names that you're throwing out, all these transfers and the freshmen they brought in are not really that highly thought. I mean, they're respected, but they're not really like, oh, that guy's going to be an NBA player per se. I think once they come and the chemistry all together, obviously the expectations last year were national championship or bust, and you've had really, really high expectations over the last couple of years. I'm of the opinion that ESPN and the powers that be are kind of underrating Alabama, but all the pieces, the parts are better. Put all the parts together. I think the sum of the parts is going to be really, really good next year and surprise a lot of teams. And Bristow is definitely going to be a part of that. I'm looking forward to seeing how Coach Oates takes every piece, and then just add LeBaron and Philon back on top of that. Takes every piece and turns it into a real team. I think that there's going to be. You walk into the year thinking fourth, fifth, sixth in the SEC, maybe just on paper, not knowing all the question marks. But as you work through the non-conference schedule and really get to, through the SEC schedule, I think you're going to see a team that, this team is really, really competitive night in, night out, just like Nate Oates has always been, and is going to be poised for a deep tournament run.
Yeah, and I think the thing with, like you were saying, underrated, I think, LeBaron Philon changed some of that, right? There was a lot of people pre-LeBaron Philon, right? Like, I think even if you add a guy like Desmond Claude, right? Highly rated guy, but because he was an unknown commodity in our system, at least, I don't think that the expectations of this team would have rebounded as well as they did. I think that the people that rebounded their expectations on Alabama were people that, you got LeBaron Philon back and they're like, okay, I'm willing to, give Nate Oates some grace. Like, he's not finished lower than this amount. Like, we've just got to give him like kind of the Nate Oates bump of he's going to do at least this well because he's proven it time in and time out. That's one that I'm very curious about. I think that the underrated teams, when we talked about the team going in, that made the Final Four, that was a team that, didn't have the same expectations that last year's team did. Right. It was a 4 seed. It wasn't the 1 seed. It wasn't the 2 seed. There is something to say that when Nate Oates has a little bit worse expectations, he's going to ask the sports reporters to put him at 5th again. That's the old adage of the couple of times they've finished 5th, they've, Elite 8, Final Four. And that's just something that has not been the case, historically. So I am very curious to see how that's going to be. Like I said, don't want to have this all be about basketball, but did want to, start at the top with a couple of things, like I said, I mentioned in the last episode.
I'll just let you know that when I do get the voting ballot, I don't care what it is. I'm putting Alabama 5th just for that factor.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm sure Nate Oates is definitely going to make a comment about it. I thought that it's been pretty funny. He even made the comment last year of like, "Hey, can I get you guys to vote us 5th? Like, we may be too highly talented for that, but like, can you vote us 5th?" I think this year, if I was to guess, who's going to be, preseason ranked, Florida, Kentucky. The question then becomes, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Arkansas, right? Those are kind of the school, Ole Miss, right? Those are some of the schools that are in that next tier of, who's going to be ranked higher than who. We'll see. I think that there's definitely a lot of questions to be answered. Could we be 5th preseason? Sure. My thoughts closer in that 3rd to 4th range. If I was to, harness a guess, obviously my expectations remain the same. You got to finish in a double bye. That my expectation is double bye in the SEC tournament and second weekend in March Madness. Like, that's your expectations coming into any season because that's what you've raised the floor to, right? The floor needs to be double bye second weekend, because if you can't do that, then you've caused some problem, whether it comes to NIL, whether it comes to like, what have you done? And I think that in general, he's done a good job managing it. You're going to see this year, however, for anybody that followed it pretty closely, Nate didn't want to pay for a couple of players early on. And so they missed out on some guys that they potentially could have gotten had they been willing to pony up some extra cash. Now, it may have worked out for us. We may have finished with the roster that's going to be okay, but only time will tell if that's going to be a problem. You're missing out on Adrian Woolley or Jerron Pierre. Or are those names going to come back to bite us? We'll see, right? We don't know the answer to that question, and I don't think anybody does.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I would almost, at this point, 7 years in, six going into 7th year, 7 years in, it's kind of Nate Oates that I trust. And you'd almost, in my opinion, this is just Joe, but I would rather save that money for people returning the following years, that sort of thing, reward developing in your program. And I think that you passed on guys, and maybe that played into a factor of helping getting LeBaron Philon back. And if that was the trade-off, to me, that's a win.
Correct. I think that passing on guys helps you get LeBaron back. I think also passing on certain guys is the reason why you potentially get like a guy like Bristow, right? If a Mohamed Diabate comes back, and obviously I'm not going to just single him out, but if a guy like Mo D comes back, does Bristow potentially come in?
Yeah,
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you don't go after a guy like that. And from what I'm hearing, his potential, he's one of the guys, honestly, similar to Fallon, that once he gets the chance, he's the name that you're hearing, right? And that Phylon was that guy last year.
yeah.
And the reason I keep mentioning Bristow is for anybody that was in the loop, Phylon was the name we heard last year of he might redshirt, and then you hear Phylon coming into the summer of like, no, this guy's going to play.
Yeah.
This guy might start. Like he's causing Mark all kinds of problems. So we're going to shift over into football because today on Twitter has been a wild day as it relates to football recruiting. And we're actually going to start with something that I know that you talked about as well, but I just want to get your thoughts on it. Ryan Williams, made the comments about Diego Pavia. I know you talked about it. I talked about it as well. What are your kind of overall thoughts on, do you think it was a smart idea to even bring it up? Or B, do you think that it's, this is almost the downside of the Saban's philosophy of, when we saw Quinn and Williams, go to say something and then immediately backtrack it. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
My first thought is I'm not Ryan Williams, and he's a lot more confident than I am, and has a lot more skills than I am. So skills and talent than I ever had. But backing up into my own perspective, I think, okay, but Ryan, you probably need to slow your roll a little bit. But who am I to tell him that? I think that the only concern that I have is, Vanderbilt last year had a perfect game plan, but Alabama also didn't play very well and allowed Vanderbilt to latch on to belief, latch on to, okay, we are doing this thing as the game went on. I don't know that Diego Pavia is exceptionally talented. I do think he's an exceptional quarterback and really a winner at heart. Do you poke that bear and stir up the bee's nest? Do you stir him up to get him going, juicing up his players? I think that's a little bit dangerous, but again, I'm not Brian Williams, and he's a I hate to use the word generational, but a generational prospect and player. So he's operating on a different plane than really most football players are, I believe. And so he's got a little more leeway. I think he was kind of asked and baited into that comment, and I don't really see him as the type to shy away when he is asked about something. My own perspective is I wish he would just maybe put his head down and say, "Well, we'll do our best." This, that, and the other, because Diego Pavia, I think, is the type to chew on some bulletin board material for 7-8 months and see what they can do when they come to Tuscaloosa. Now, the talent disparity is still there between Alabama and Vanderbilt. So if Alabama is actually playing their A game and not getting pushed around to the line of scrimmage, then not having pick sixes or fumbles as you're trying to go in to tie the game, then really you should be okay in that game. I'm just a little leery of poking the Diego Pavia bear.
And I agree with that. And I think the big thing that you just mentioned is, getting pushed around on defense. Because I think, I point to that Vanderbilt game as the game that changed our defense last season, right? I think it's easy to do that, right? When you look at the Vanderbilt game, like some people will say, oh, Alabama lost games after that with Tennessee and Oklahoma. Go look at those games. The defense didn't lose you those games. The offense did, right? In Oklahoma, you throw pick sixes. In the Tennessee game, you hold Heupel's offense to 17 points. Going into that game, I would have taken that in a heartbeat, right? These are scores that you would have been completely good with, but your offense just let you down, right? So I think that's where your Ryan Grubb comes into effect. But I think the big thing is your defense, right? I think that the defense is in a place that Alabama, is this going to be one of the better defenses Alabama has had in the last couple of years, in my opinion. I know Pro Football Focus put out a thing saying that Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb may be the best safeties pairing in the sport. There's another one that had Alabama's secondary as top 5 in the country. What are your kind of general thoughts on, like, where is this defense? I know I talked about it as, the returning production numbers. Alabama's like about 70% returning production. You only are missing a few starters, and every guy who's going to play has played substantial minutes. I think it may come down to Kai Hill Green, how good a, centering force he is from Colorado. But what do you think in general about Alabama's defense this year?
I think we're going to find out right off the bat because Gus Malzahn. Look, I don't know that Florida State is particularly that talented in the skill position, but Gus Malzahn's going to use Castellanos in the quarterback run game, and so you're going to get a chance to figure out if you've got it fixed right off the bat. You looked at really some of the way that some of these offenses attacked Alabama's defense last year, and it was just quarterback run, movement up front, kind of gap scheme that really got after them. But you bring back so much. And I agree with you that really the defense improved throughout the year after that Vanderbilt game. I think the one gap system took a second for everybody to kind of grasp where they needed to be and when they needed to be there. But you're dealing with some of the most elite athletes in the sport in college football. I'm excited about the secondary. I think that the secondary is going to be really, really challenging to throw on with the return of Damani Jackson, with Bray Hubbard, and with Keon getting back healthy. I'm excited about Xavier Mincy. I think he and Red Morgan are going to be a really nice addition mixing in as that third safety. But I see Deshaun Jones and Cam Calhoun as kind of real big X factors. I think both of those guys can play Husky, but both those guys can play either corner, boundary, or field. And so you got a lot of flexibility in the secondary, a lot of it. And I am a little bit concerned about the return of Deontay Lawson's knee, but that's another personal perspective. I had a bunch of knee surgeries in high school and was an average athlete at best. He's a much better athlete than I am and has much better care. So I do think he's going to bounce back well. Just knee injuries make me personally a little bit leery. I'm concerned once you get past him, I'm with you with Nikai Hill-Green, that he and Justin Jefferson have the potential to be really, really standout tandem. When you get past them, Caden Jones, is he ready to participate? QB Reese has got a lot of praise in the spring. Is he ready to really step in there? Abdul Sanders, lots of young guys past the first three. But the defense just, you said it yourself, 70% returning production. There's no reason why you shouldn't go to Florida State and really put the clamps on them right off the bat and have these first 3 weeks, Florida State, ULM, Wisconsin, feeling really good about yourself before you go into Athens. All the talk has been who's playing quarterback, but I think the defense is going to give you enough of a runway, enough of a foundation to where if Ty's not perfect down there in Tallahassee, it's going to be okay because Florida State's going to struggle to score 13 points, going to struggle to score 10 points. And same with Wisconsin. I mean, these first couple of weeks, I think this defense is going to start off on level 10, and really be hard to score against the entire year.
Yeah, and you just brought it up, so I think your answer is probably going to be very similar to mine. And I think a very sad situation that happened with Keelan's sister, but I think that also partially plays into this because I'm not sure how his mental is going to be here early season, right? I think obviously putting himself back into football is going to help with that, but you never know how somebody's going to deal with losing a loved one, losing a twin, right? That is a heartbreaking situation. Is your thought still that, Ty Simpson starts game one and until further notice, Ty is the starting quarterback? Because currently that's my thought process is Ty has done everything to whether it be win the team's trust. Obviously we've seen the photos of him going out hunting with the guys or whatever.
Where was he in that photo?
I think he was in the center.
No, I didn't see anybody in that photo. Too much camo.
But he going in the going out hunting with the guys, whatever, right? It really feels like Ty has developed the leadership mentality, right? That you need to be the starting quarterback at a place like Alabama. Obviously he's waited his turn. He has the pedigree with his, dad being a coach and such. Is he the guy?
Yeah, I'm actually. I think that Ty is going to hold the job all year. Really, I think that he's going to get the first chance to play in Florida State, and I think he's going to get 2, 3, 4, 5 drives to move the offense because the defensive foundation is so strong. I'm confident in Ty Simpson's ability. I don't know. Now, Keelan's talent is otherworldly and really, really fun to watch. I do think that what you mentioned is going to play just a small factor, because how could it not? How could it not shake a twin? I mean, goodness gracious, what a tragedy. But I think that Ty Simpson, it's going to be his job to really go out there and lose. Um, I'm reminded a little bit of 2016. You get a couple drives of Blake Barnett, and he can't really move the offense. Then you throw in Jalen Hurts. You had a great defense then, too. I mean, amazing defense. I'm not sure if the hook is going to be that quick, because I think that the leadership ability and the investment, the equity that Ty Simpson has is probably a lot more equity than Blake Barnett had in 2016. So I think his leash is going to be a little bit longer. And then if you can get out of Florida State, well, he's definitely going to stay right there in control for ULM. It's really going to come down to what happens in Athens. If he is able to keep the offense on track, don't turn the football over, just try to do your best Mac Jones impersonation. And really, I think he's going to be more talented and more dynamic than Mac Jones was. So I do think that he's operating at a higher level. I'm confident in Ty Simpson. He's going to be the best quarterback in the SEC? No, I don't think he's even probably going to be the top 3 quarterbacks in the SEC, but he's going to be good enough. The wide receiver room is just disgustingly rich with talent, and so you're just going to have to find the open guy. The old A.J. McCarron line that Nick Saban would give him, don't go broke taking a profit, and I think Ty Simpson knows that and will just embody that throughout the season.
Yeah, I think my thoughts when I'm looking at Ty Simpson isn't that he starts. Right, my question becomes honestly more of a Tua situation when Tua was sitting behind Jalen Hurts, and what I mean by that is Tua never, Jalen won Offensive Player of the Year, right, the year before for the SEC, and full disclosure, I had class with Jalen. He's a guy that I respect very well. I was in class actually with Jalen and Blake Barnett the season when all that went down, and it was a situation where the thing with, when everybody talks about Saban pulling Jalen for Tua in the national title game, that kind of felt like it was building all season, because every game that, Jalen would get us up big, Tua would come in and mop up duty, and he had some type of play, whether it was in the Louisville game when he had to throw to the back corner off the spin, or there was something that he did that just felt like this kid is special, right? This kid can spin the ball in a way that Jalen just can't, right? Not to say that Jalen's a bad quarterback. He just won a Super Bowl, for goodness sake. But it's just a different level of spinning the football. And that's more of my curiosity. If there becomes a game down the stretch of Ty struggling, right? How long is the leash, right? Or do the answer may be the defense is so good that he has a longer leash than Jalen did that year, right? Or, obviously Jalen had that leash until a national title game, right? There were some games that year that I think some people may have wanted and pulled in that season, right? But that's more of my question when I'm looking at the Keelan versus Ty. I agree with you. I think Ty is the answer, and I think Ty is going to be very good enough to be that guy. But the question becomes, when you have that elite talent sitting behind him, does the allure of, hey, I have this other guy, does it matter? Or, Ryan Grove comes in and he can make Ty be the guy, and you don't even have to worry about that, right? This may be a complete moot point.
Well, I think that you got to look back a little bit closer to the Jalen Tua stuff and recognize that while Jalen was super dangerous with his legs, he was essentially a one to 2 read quarterback. And it was is Calvin Ridley breaking open? Okay, no, I might gonna pull it down and see what I can do. The offense started to get boxed in a bit throughout that year. And I think the defensive coordinator started to catch up. What we need to do with Calvin Ridley on the outside, and how we need to hem Jalen Hurts in the pocket. And these factors, I think, forced you to go to Ty Simpson, to a Tagovailoa. The questions about Ty Simpson. With Ty going forward, I'm not sure that he's limited in that fashion in the passing game. Obviously, his legs are not Jalen Hurts' legs, not Jalen Miller, but his legs are adequate enough. I think that in the passing game, he's going to be able to go from 1 to 2 to check down, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and work through his progressions, so the offense isn't boxed in enough. Now, is he careful enough with the football? Is he not throwing it into danger? Those are different questions. But I think that his skill sets will enable him or lead him to a place where he can be a viable option the entire year.
And I think the other answer is, not to say that obviously you're talking about the situations. the receiving room that came in with Tua was different than the receiving room that Jalen had, right?
Massive.
Because if you remember, the swap at halftime was not just the quarterback. It was also the receiving room, right? Devontae Smith, as a freshman, caught that pass because he came in with the backup with Tua, right? So that's also the situation. And I think that's also the thing. Ty will be having Ryan Williams and will be having these guys to throw to. So I think the receiving room, like you mentioned earlier, is going to be good enough that, Ty isn't going to have to be a hero with his arm. Just like you said, find the open guy, don't go broke, finding the open man.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this receiving room. Ryan gets all the love, really, and he should. But Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton are just as talented, really, as college receivers. I think that Isaiah Horton's addition to the room is the proverbial straw, really, that opens everything up, because you can't just sit on Ryan. You can't just double him up and just say, okay, we'll take our chances with you throwing to Jeremy Bernard. That third factor is really going to make things really challenging on secondaries. And so you get that, and then maybe mix in a little Cole Adams, Latia Brooks, and you're going to be cooking with a lot of gas.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. All right, so we're going to finish up with some news, and I want to see if I can get kind of your thoughts on the recruiting. Obviously, anybody that follows Twitter recently, and just for a heads up, we're recording this on June the 12th. On Thursday at approximately 5:20. So the news we say right now may or may not be old by the time you listen to this. So just, be forewarned, because I know obviously in recruiting and in sports, this news moves very, very quickly. But Alabama, there were some posts, about how, and we'll go with like the 247, for anybody that followed like the 247 versus the on-3 numbers, there was a post of a screenshot of Alabama at like 50 something in the recruiting rankings. Obviously everybody was like, yeah, that's just BS, don't worry about it. Obviously then Alabama has their massive recruiting weekend this last weekend, and the tides seem to be turning, and Cedric Morgan, starts posting. It looks like we've got some guys, Hayes Fawcett, that does a lot of the breaking commitments over on the football side. He says that Alabama is probably getting 3 guys. There's a ton of 5 stars that were in this most recent recruiting weekend. Is there anything that you're hearing of, hey, these guys are almost semi-imminent, and Alabama's made some leeway as it relates to some others maybe that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think that the first part of your discussion is just so funny how it happens every year. I mean, every single under Saban, and now I mean, obviously with the new staff, there is a little bit more room for a question mark. But every single year, it's late May, it's early June. Alabama's not doing good. What in the world is it over? Give it to early August, and you're gonna be feeling just fine. I think these Hayes Fawcett is teasing three commitments that are coming very soon for Alabama. I think you're going to see Jair Edwards. I think you're going to see Brian Williams Jr. and Kamari Brooks all in the next 46, 72, somewhere in the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. And golly, you just put on. Today I put in Jair Edwards tape, and I was like, oh, I love this kid. And then I put in Kamari Brooks' tape, and I said, I love this kid even more. You've got 2 defenders in those 2 guys that look like college athletes already, and they look like perfect fits for the Kane Womack system. With Jair Edwards, he's going to be a safety that can play in the box, that can play in all your nickel packages, and really probably just walk right into challenging for a husky role. Obviously, you got to learn some stuff, but physically, he looks the absolute part, and his instincts, at least in his highlight tapes, look like he knows what's going on at pretty much every play defensively. This Kamari Brooks fella out of Georgia, edge rusher, looks like a mini Quay Russaw playing Wolf, and so I'm really, really excited to see what they're doing. And then Brian Williams Jr., big-bodied wide receiver, 3-star prospect, out of Florida. I think that you need to stop worrying about some of these, some of the recruiting evaluations, and I think maybe you're going to see, once you see some of these freshmen on the field this year, and then you see who ends up in this class. I think Alabama fans are going to be really, really happy with what Courtney Morgan is doing and Kalen DeBoer. I'm just impressed that they were able to walk right in and pick it right up where Coach Saban left off. Now, obviously, their eye is a little bit different, looking for just a few things differently, but the talent, I think, is going to be just as high as any time in Coach Saban's tenure.
Yeah, and some of the guys you're mentioning, and some of the other guys that, for people unaware, these are not the only guys that Alabama has on the hook, so to speak. There's plenty. There was a huge recruit. Yeah, I mean, there's whether you're talking, and you're going to have to help me
Darian
because
Morgan, Xavier Griffin are both out there, but they've already got dates set for their commitment.
Xavier Crowell, that's just about guaranteed to be in Alabama, right? There's 4 or 5 5-star guys, and if I remember back, Alabama's best 5-star recruiting class, I want to say was 6 under Saban, 6 or 7 5-stars. Kalen DeBoer and Cedric Morgan they're knocking on that door right now of potentially hitting that number, and that's the thing that really in my mind, or Courtney Morgan, I'm sorry. That's the thing that people really need to understand is, like you said, right? Coming into this, Kalen DeBoer was, can he recruit? Because he never had that recruiting class. And people tried to say over and over and over again, the Josh Pates of the world and other people that had kind of talked to him said he didn't recruit like that because he didn't have to recruit like that. And he didn't have the ability to recruit like that because he was at Washington,
Exactly.
Right? He couldn't recruit to the Georgia, from the Atlantas of the world and convince them to come up to Washington. It just wasn't going to be the case. Yeah. And you're seeing that take place right now, right? Alabama's in the recruiting battles with all the top dogs that you would expect them to be in with. They're winning some of them, they're losing some of them. That's how recruiting works. Don't expect to win all of them. With NIL and, obviously it's going to change a little bit. We will see how the House settlement changes all of that. But, the fact that Alabama is in a very good place when it comes to finances. And this is from an NIL perspective and how Courtney Morgan runs everything. He's done it. In my mind, he's done as good a job as anyone in the country. And that's the reason why he's one of the most highly compensated GMs as anyone in the country. I think the big thing that people just need to understand is, as you mentioned, slow down. It's the same thing when people were freaking out with basketball, right? The basketball roster, a month ago or 2 months ago, let's say, looks much different than it looks today. And people were freaking out like, oh my gosh, this guy's gone, this guy's gone. Football is the same way, right? Recruiting is what that looks like on May the 1st is much different than what it's going to look like on August 31st. Those are two very different things. I think that's what people just need to be aware of, because if, as a fan, obviously we want that instant gratification. We want our team to already be at the top so you can talk smack to everybody else. But does it matter, right? We're seeing guys decommit, and it happens every year. You're bragging on, oh, I got this guy, and then all of a sudden he decommits, right? At the end of the day, we care about who's going to put on the jersey, not who's going to be on some ranking on some website that you may or may not have ever heard of.
Right. Do you want to see Kalen DeBoer jump in a pool for a 5-star and then 3 weeks later have that 5-star say, see you later, sucker? It's just, look at the calendar. Look at all these elite prospects. June is the month where they're going on visits into just barely early July. And so you got to let these guys go take their visits. If you're still behind, which I would be shocked. If you're still behind by the first week of August, all right, then you can start putting on Twitter what's going on. But until now, while the focus of the staff right now is recruiting, let them work. Let them work and see what happens, because I think they're in a really, really good position for a lot of talent.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, right? At the end of the day, when you're talking about talent, at the end of the day, if you're coaching with less superior, the thing that everybody talked about with DeBoer, and you're going to see what happens in this next season, but that he's won a lot of games with inferior talent. So now let's see what he can do with superior talent, right? Because as you're talking about, that is what he's going to have is, as he's recruiting all these guys, he's recruiting guys to play his system. I think that it's been understated how important Ryan Grubb returning is. Not to say Nick Sheridan did a poor job last season, but I do think that Ryan Grubb, has a little bit better sequencing of plays, right? I think that's where Sheridan lacked the most last season, personally.
A bit, but I think Sheridan's hands, I think he was in such a complicated spot. And man, yes, you wanted a little bit more. You didn't want to lose to Oklahoma, and you wanted to put up some more points in Knoxville. But I think for all the complications that he had to deal with, I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, unfortunately for the elephant in the room, I think Nick Sheridan's hands were tied, and um, I think it was for a certain reason, right? And everybody knows the reason. And unfortunately, that was just the case, right? So I don't want to say you can't take anything DeBoer did last season and think about it, because of course he's going to be judged
Sure.
by last season. He was the coach. But in my mind, this is the first real season of, now let me see what, when you've had a full off season, people have committed to you multiple times, and you're not maybe playing somebody because the whole team's going to quit on you if you don't.
Well, I'm not sure about the quit on them, but you're operating out of different sections of the playbook last season, and not to say that those plays weren't Kalen DeBoer's plays in his system; they were. But I think I think last season you were operating out of, oh, how many wrinkles can we actually turn into our real scheme? In this coming season, I do think Ty Simpson's going to run some. I think he's going to get out and run some, but I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of, this is my playbook, this is the system, this is the style. And to your sequencing point, the sequencing will look a lot more conducive to all the plays together. I wonder how much last season was just smoke and mirrors for what can we read, what can we run, what can we get out, and what can we block. First off, goodness gracious, what can we block? And so you're operating maybe out of a different area and a limited area of the playbook. Whereas this season, I think the playbook's going to be a lot more wide open, and he's going to be Ryan Grubb, Shepard, and Sheridan will be able to put their brains together and really, really mess with some defensive coordinators.
I 100% agree. Well, thank you so much. That's really all I had today, Joe. Please tell the people where they can find you. I know I mentioned it up at the top, but please tell the people where they can find you. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. My social medias are all Joe Gaither 6 on whatever you're looking for. The Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central is on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Amazon, Spotify. I write for BamaCentral.com. I'm really one of the lower people. I want to shout out Katie Wyndham, Hunter DeCipher, and Will Miller. They do a lot of our written work and do a great job. You can just type in Alabama Crimson Tide on SI.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show. As I mentioned, Joe, I really appreciate it. As always, if you enjoy this content, please subscribe to the channel. It does help me and support me in all that I do. I have some more guests that I have scheduled. I'm going to come on later in the summer. So if y'all are interested in all this content, subscribe there. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching. See ya.